Picture this. You're standing in line at the airport, juggling a coffee, your bag, your boarding pass, everything humming along in that smug, I've got my life together today energy. And then, bam, the gate attendant tells you your passport expired last month. That single overlooked detail detonates your entire trip. You watch the plane you were supposed to be on lift off without you, blasting into the sky like a flaming symbol of your own preventable disaster. And in that moment, as your travel plans collapse into a smoldering heap of refund emails and frantic rebooking searches, you can almost hear the universe whispering, "You could have avoided this. All of it." We've all had some version of that moment, that punch-in-the-gut realization that things didn't fall apart because the world is cruel or chaotic, but because we didn't take a few seconds to imagine what might go wrong. It's the kind of moment that makes you swear you'll be more prepared next time, only for life to hit you with another curveball, because you never quite learned how to think about risk in a way that's simple, usable, and not drowned in equations or spreadsheets from someone who calls themselves a quant and sounds like they speak only in Greek letters. Not today. Today you're learning the version that real humans use, because in this video, I'm going to hand you the tools the pros use, not the heavy, academic labyrinth of math tools, but the simple, intuitive, deadly effective ones that let you spot danger before it even thinks about tapping you on the shoulder. I'm going to show you how to manage risk without turning into some calculator-worshipping robot, and instead become the kind of person who gracefully dodges disasters while everyone around you is busy wondering why life always blindsides them. If you've ever wanted to feel like the mastermind who stays 3 steps ahead, the person who seems to anticipate problems before they materialize, the person who avoids losses not by luck but by design, then buckle up, because what you're about to learn is the secret blueprint. By the end of this, you'll walk away with a practical, reality-proofed approach to risk management, the kind that doesn't just make your projects better or your decisions smarter, but makes your entire life feel like it suddenly shifted into the "I actually know what the hell I'm doing" dimension. And the best part? You won't touch a single equation, not one. No formulas, no probability charts that look like they came out of a casino or a meteorology lab. Just clear thinking, simple methods, and a mental toolkit that transforms the way you navigate the world. This is where the guesswork ends and the clarity begins. Risk, at its core, isn't some mystical force or academic construct reserved for boardrooms and analysts who pretend to enjoy spreadsheets. Risk is simply the possibility that the future refuses to behave the way you expect it to. It's the gap between the world you think you're operating in and the world that actually shows up. When people say something was risky, what they're really saying is that the outcome had the potential to flip, twist, or explode in a direction they didn't prepare for. And when they say something went wrong, they're admitting that they tried to predict the future, and the future essentially laughed in their face. But here's the thing. Most people never understand. Risk and uncertainty are not the same beast. Uncertainty is the fog. You can't see what's coming. You can't measure it. You can't even describe it clearly. It's the vast unknown where everything is possible and nothing is predictable. Risk, though, is uncertainty with some shape, some edges, some graspable sense of direction. Risk is what happens when you can identify a potential problem well enough to think about it ahead of time. In a way, risk is the friendly version of uncertainty. It's the one you can sit down with, ask questions, and get answers that aren't just vague cosmic static. This difference matters because risk management is not about controlling the universe or eliminating danger. That's impossible unless you plan to live in a padded room eating flavorless mush while staring at the wall. Real risk management is about recognizing that life is a series of moving pieces welded together by assumptions. Assumptions about money, time, people, technology, promises, deadlines, your own abilities, and understanding that every one of those assumptions has the power to betray you if you don't keep an eye on it. It's about shining a spotlight on the places where things could collapse, so they don't get the chance to ambush you in the dark. And the reason this matters isn't limited to scary business situations, dramatic project catastrophes, or financial landmines waiting to blast through your savings. Risk management is woven into the decisions you make every single day. When you choose a route to work, when you invest time into a relationship, when you start a side project, when you schedule tasks, when you launch a business, when you take on a client, when you trust a promise someone gave you. Every single move carries invisible threads of risk twisting through it. Whether you realize it or not, you're already doing risk management. You're just doing it unconsciously, inconsistently, and usually after something goes wrong. The power move, the move that separates the people who get hit by avoidable problems from the ones who glide past them, is to take that instinctive, messy, reactive version of risk management and turn it into something intentional and controlled. When you understand what risk truly is, when you stop treating it like bad luck or randomness, and instead see it as something that can be named, studied, shaped, and prepared for, your entire world changes. Decisions stop feeling like desperate leaps and start feeling like calculated steps. Plans stop crumbling at the first sign of friction. Stress evaporates because you're no longer praying things will go right. You've prepared for when they don't. Risk management, in its purest form, is about claiming ownership over the future instead of letting the future whip you around like a rag doll. It's about stepping into a mindset where threats become manageable, uncertainty becomes navigable, and chaos becomes something you're not afraid of because you understand how to break it down. And once you see risk through this lens, everything else we're about to cover becomes not only simple, but genuinely empowering. Everything in risk management, no matter how complex, no matter how corporate or dramatic or high stakes it looks from the outside, boils down to three deceptively simple questions. These questions are so fundamental, so brutally effective, that once you internalize them, you'll start seeing the world differently, like someone finally handed you the glasses you didn't know you needed. They act as the spine, the skeleton, the central nervous system of every single risk process on the planet. And the wild part is that you don't need formulas or algorithms or any specialized knowledge to use them. You just need honesty, awareness, and the willingness to interrogate your own assumptions before they betray you. The first question is the one most people avoid because it feels uncomfortable. What could go wrong? Not what you hope will happen, not what you assume will happen, not the rosy picture you've painted in your head, but the real, gritty, unwelcome possibilities that you usually shove aside because acknowledging them feels like inviting doom. But this question isn't pessimism, it's power. It forces you to look behind the curtain and confront the vulnerabilities hiding in your plans. And when you let yourself actually explore this, you begin to notice fragilities you never considered. Fragilities in timing, in people, in resources, in commitments, in technology, in your own limits. Asking what could go wrong is the moment where risk stops being invisible and starts becoming something you can handle. The second question digs even deeper, slicing through denial like a scalpel. How bad would it be? This is the point where you imagine the consequences without sugarcoating them, without downplaying them, without pretending everything would somehow magically resolve itself. You take the potential problem and stretch it out to see the impact. Would it cost money? Would it shatter trust? Would it delay everything? Would it break something you can't rebuild? Would it drain your time, your momentum, your energy, your reputation? This question isn't about fear. It's about clarity. When you understand the true weight of a risk, you suddenly see which threats are minor annoyances and which ones are nuclear bombs waiting to drop on your plans. And then comes the question that transforms you from a passive observer into an active strategist. What can we do about it? This is where you shift from, I hope this doesn't happen, to, here's exactly how we're going to prevent it, soften it, dodge it, or prepare for it. This question turns you from someone reacting to life's chaos into someone shaping the outcome. It's the question that separates people who watch their goals collapse from people who build shockproof systems around them. This question is the moment risk management stops being theoretical and becomes practical, tangible, and intensely empowering. These three questions operate like a mental spotlight, cutting straight through the fog and illuminating the weak points that normally stay hidden until they detonate. And the beauty is that you can apply them to anything: your finances, your projects, your travel plans, your relationships, your job, your business, your health routines, even your assumptions about tomorrow morning. You don't need charts or metrics or deep analysis. You just need the willingness to ask these questions early instead of waiting for disaster to answer them for you. Once these questions become second nature, you start noticing that risk isn't this unpredictable monster lurking in the shadows. It's often a predictable pattern of oversights, shortcuts, and blind spots. By asking what could go wrong, how bad it would be, and what you can do about it, you break that pattern. You stop making decisions in the dark. You start preparing not because you expect failure, but because you're intelligent enough to anticipate reality. And reality always rewards the people who think ahead. Before you can manage risks, you have to drag them into the light, because the most dangerous problems aren't the ones that roar at you. They're the ones that hide quietly behind your assumptions, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And this is where most people trip over their own confidence. They think identifying risks requires some grand process, some professional ritual involving flowcharts and legal pads and fluorescent highlighters. But the truth is hilariously simple. The most powerful way to expose risks is to dump every possible concern, suspicion, doubt, and, oh God, I hope that doesn't happen, thought onto the table in one raw, unfiltered sweep. This is the risk brain dump. It's messy, it's chaotic, it's borderline cathartic, and it works like magic because it forces your brain to cough up the half-formed worries and subconscious alerts that you normally shove aside while pretending everything is fine. You sit down and you let your mind wander through every piece of the thing you're planning, your project, your trip, your business idea, your relationship decision, whatever it is, and you let yourself think, all right, if the universe wanted to ruin this for me, how would it do it? You don't judge, you don't prioritize, you don't categorize at first, you just pour it all out. Every possible snag, every potential obstacle, every assumption that might be weaker than you think. That's where the real risk identification begins, and the results are often shockingly revealing. Once you've spilled everything into the open, that's when the structure comes in. Not rigid, not mathematical, just enough to help you make sense of the chaos. You take your raw list and start viewing it through a few simple lenses: financial, operational, reputational, and strategic. These categories aren't fancy. They're just four angles to help your brain notice things it would normally ignore. Financial risks are anything that could suck money out of your wallet or your budget. Operational risks are the mechanical failures, the process breakdowns, the someone didn't do what they said they'd do nightmares. Reputational risks include anything that could tarnish trust, credibility, or how others perceive you. And strategic risks are the big picture misalignments, the things that might sink the entire plan because the foundation was wrong from the start. Looking at your brain dump through these four lenses does something powerful. It turns the messy fog into clear shapes. Suddenly you notice money assumptions you hadn't examined. You realize certain steps depend entirely on one fragile person or resource. You see potential misunderstandings that could blow up relationships or crush credibility. You spot cracks in the long-term direction that could turn into chasms if ignored. It's like scanning a battlefield from a higher vantage point. You see the threats you never noticed when you were down in the weeds. But the real secret weapon is learning to hunt for assumptions. Because every risk, every single one, lurks inside an assumption you made without thinking. You assumed the software would work. You assumed your friend would show up. You assumed the deadline was realistic. You assumed the supplier would deliver. You assumed you'd have the energy. You assumed nothing unexpected would interrupt you. These assumptions slip past you like pickpockets. They look harmless until they aren't. When you begin examining your brain dump and asking, what assumption does this risk expose? You unmask the real fragility behind the scenes. It's like suddenly realizing the foundation of your plan is made of glass instead of steel. And this process, this mix of raw brainstorming, gentle categorizing, and assumption hunting, creates an incredibly accurate map of where things can collapse. Not because you used complicated tools, but because you finally asked your brain the right questions and gave yourself permission to think about what might actually happen instead of what you wish would happen. It's fast, it's intuitive, and the more you do it, the sharper your instincts become. You start noticing risks in real time, even before the brain dump. Your intuition becomes a radar. Your awareness becomes a shield. Once you can identify risks this way, clearly, honestly, without pretense, you're no longer blindsided. You're informed, and being informed is the first step toward being untouchable. Once you've dragged all your risks into the daylight, the next move is figuring out which ones actually matter, because not every potential disaster deserves your attention. Some risks are just background noise, little pebbles on the road that might annoy you but won't derail anything, while others are lurking landmines capable of blowing your entire plan into the stratosphere. The trick, the thing that separates people who stay calm under pressure from people who panic, is learning how to evaluate these risks without drowning in numbers or burying yourself under probability charts that look like they were designed by a bored statistician with a grudge against humanity. And here's the secret that professionals quietly rely on. Your intuition is already doing half the work for you. You already know when something feels likely or unlikely. You already know when something would be a small inconvenience or a catastrophic nightmare. Most people just never formalize that instinct, never articulate it, never give it structure. But when you blend intuition with a simple scale, no math, no formulas, just a scale, you turn vague feelings into clear, actionable insight that even your future stressed-out self will thank you for. So here's combining these two insights, likelihood and impact, doesn't require math. It just requires common sense. A risk that is high likelihood and high impact immediately shoots to the top of your priority list because your intuition knows that combination is a ticking bomb. A risk that is low likelihood and low impact barely deserves a passing thought. A high likelihood but low impact risk is more like a swarm of mosquitoes, annoying, persistent, worth planning around but not worth losing sleep over. And a low likelihood but high impact risk is your dramatic, cinematic disaster scenario. The kind of thing you might never see, but if it hits like a meteor. What makes this method so powerful, and why pros swear by it even when they have fancier tools, is that it calibrates your judgment. Over time, as you evaluate more risks, your intuition becomes sharper, more accurate, almost eerily predictive. You begin to sense when something has for energy, when something deserves to be taken seriously, when a small threat might snowball into something monstrous, when a seemingly big threat is actually harmless, puffed-up fluff. Experience reinforces your internal compass. Patterns emerge. You become someone who doesn't just react to chaos, but anticipates it with almost supernatural clarity. And this is the beauty of using simple scales. They remove emotional distortion. Instead of catastrophizing everything, instead of pretending everything will be fine, instead of guessing, you anchor your perception. You give each risk a place on the map. You tell your brain, this is where this belongs. This is what it means. And clarity like that, clean, confident, unambiguous clarity, is the difference between being overwhelmed and being in control. Now that each risk has a sense of its likelihood and its potential impact, the next step is turning that understanding into priorities, and this is where the risk matrix comes in, not the corporate, sterile spreadsheet version that makes your spirit leave your body, but the stripped-down, intuitive, human version that feels more like arranging thoughts on a table than doing any kind of calculation. The matrix is nothing more than a mental map with 4 quadrants, and once you start placing your risks into these quadrants, you'll feel everything snap into focus with ridiculous clarity. It's like going from staring at a chaotic blob of problems to suddenly seeing a clean battlefield where every threat has a position, a meaning, and a level of urgency you can't ignore. The first quadrant is the low likelihood, low impact space. These are the gnats of the risk world, the tiny irritations that might show up but won't do real damage. When you place a risk here, you can practically hear your brain sigh with relief because these aren't disasters waiting to happen. They're barely inconveniences. You acknowledge them, you keep them in your peripheral vision, and you move on. They don't deserve your energy, and the matrix makes that obvious. It frees you from obsessing over small problems that don't matter. Then there's the low likelihood but high impact quadrant. This is where the dramatic disasters live, the meteors, the freak incidents, the once-in-a-blue-moon catastrophes that probably won't strike but would be devastating if they did. These risks aren't urgent, but they are important. They loom like a dark cloud far away on the horizon. You don't panic about them, but you respect them. You prepare for them the way you prepare for earthquakes or data breaches or major breakdowns. Quietly, sensibly, in the background. So if that dark cloud ever decides to roll in, you're not caught naked in the storm. The high likelihood but low impact quadrant is where the relentless annoyances gather. The everyday friction that won't destroy your world, but will absolutely drain your time, your patience, and your momentum if you ignore them. These are the risks that whisper instead of shout. You deal with them not because they're dramatic, but because they add up like 1,000 paper cuts. The matrix forces you to give them the attention they deserve. They might not be explosive, but they erode progress if you pretend they're beneath you. And then there's the high likelihood, high impact quadrant, the dragon's den, the danger zone, the quadrant that might as well glow neon red. When a risk lands here, the matrix is screaming at you. This is the nightmare scenario that is both likely to happen and capable of wrecking everything if it does. These are the risks that demand immediate attention. No excuses, no procrastination. The moment you place a risk in this quadrant, you feel your priorities lock into place like gears engaging. Suddenly, the path forward becomes painfully obvious. This must be handled first, because not dealing with it is practically begging for disaster. The beauty of the matrix is that it transforms your messy list of risks into a visual hierarchy of urgency. You don't need numbers. You don't need formulas. You don't need anything except the ability to recognize where each risk belongs. When you mentally set them into these 4 quadrants, the important ones rise to the top naturally, effortlessly, unmistakably. You see instantly where to act, where to watch, and where to chill. The matrix doesn't calculate your priorities. It reveals them. And the sensation of that clarity is addictive. It feels like stepping out of a chaotic storm into a command center where the noise fades, the confusion evaporates, and you finally see what deserves your attention. It turns a tangled mess of dangers into a crisp roadmap. It transforms overwhelm into decisiveness. And once you use it a few times, you'll start doing it automatically, instinctively, even in the middle of conversations or decisions or planning sessions. The matrix becomes a lens you see the world through, and life suddenly feels far less random, far less stressful, far less like you're waiting for the next surprise explosion. Once you've seen your risks laid out in the matrix, once the chaos has been sorted into the 4 quadrants and the true threats have stepped out of the shadows, you reach the moment where theory turns into action. This is the point where you stop being a spectator in your own plans and step into the role of strategist, because every single risk, no matter how big or small, demands a response. Not a panicked reaction, not a rushed fix, but a deliberate chosen response. And the beauty of this part is that your toolbox isn't complicated. It only has 4 tools, 4 moves, 4 strategies that professional risk managers rely on daily, not because they're fancy, but because they're ruthlessly effective in the real world. The first response, the cleanest, sharpest, most brutally decisive, is to avoid the risk entirely. Sometimes the smartest move isn't to fight the problem or work around it. It's to step out of its path altogether. Avoiding a risk means changing your plan so the problem can't even occur, like refusing to drive through a sketchy part of town at night, or not taking on a client whose expectations are a neon flashing sign of future disaster, or choosing a different vendor because the original one gives you the kind of uneasy gut feeling that turns out to be prophetic 9 times out of 10. Avoidance is powerful because it removes the threat at the root. It's not playing defense. It's refusing to play a rigged game in the first place. The second response is to reduce the risk, and this is where you become a surgeon carving down the danger until it's manageable. Reducing a risk means lowering the likelihood or the impact, or both, by strengthening weak points before they snap. Maybe you add a double check to a process so errors don't slip through. Maybe you break a project into smaller pieces to catch failures earlier. Maybe you install backup systems, or practice a difficult skill beforehand, or build extra time into your schedule so you don't get ambushed by delays. Reduction is all about shrinking the threat until it no longer has the ability to dominate your plans. It's precise, strategic, and incredibly satisfying because you're actively disarming the bomb instead of waiting for it to go off. The third response is to transfer the risk, which is the elegant art of handing the potential damage to someone else who's better equipped to absorb it. People think this sounds sneaky or irresponsible until they realize that society is built on this exact principle. You transfer financial risk with insurance. You transfer operational risk by outsourcing tasks to experts. You transfer responsibility for specialized work by hiring people who know what they're doing instead of trying to brute force everything yourself. Transferring a risk doesn't mean avoiding responsibility. It means acknowledging that someone else has the tools, knowledge, or systems to handle that threat better than you can. It's a power move disguised as delegation. And then there's the final response: accept. This one scares people because it feels like surrender, but it's actually one of the most mature, controlled decisions you can make. Accepting a risk means acknowledging that the threat exists, understanding its potential, and deciding that it's not worth the time, money, or effort to change it. You know it might happen, you know what it would do, and you simply choose to live with it. Maybe the impact is tiny. Maybe the likelihood is low. Maybe the fix costs more than the problem itself. Acceptance is not ignorance. It's prioritization. It's being honest about what matters and what doesn't, which is something most people never master. These four responses aren't random. They're the backbone of every effective risk strategy because they cover the entire spectrum of action. Avoid, reduce, transfer, accept. These are the only four levers you ever need to pull. And once you start applying them deliberately, you'll feel the shift. Instead of being pushed around by uncertainty and hoping everything works out, you become the one shaping the outcome, choosing your battles, removing threats, reinforcing weaknesses, and preparing for the realities other people pretend won't happen. This is where risk management becomes power, not fear, not anxiety, not overthinking, but pure, controlled, intentional power. You're no longer reacting to fate, you're actively bending it. Now that you've identified your risks, evaluated them with honest clarity, placed them in the matrix, and chosen how you'll respond, it's time to assemble everything into what might be the most underrated superweapon in all of decision-making: a lean, ruthless, crystal-clear risk plan. Not a bloated corporate monstrosity, not a 40-page document written for people who want to sound smart. I mean a plan so clean, so sharp, so brutally functional that it feels like a checklist forged out of pure foresight. Something you can glance at and instantly know where you stand, what's coming, and how you're going to slam the brakes on disaster before it even wakes up in the morning. A lean risk plan is short enough to fit on a single page, yet powerful enough to save you from complete meltdowns. You start with your top risks, the ones that matter, the ones that aren't just theoretical fluff, the ones that could genuinely punch a hole in your plans if you turn your back. You don't list everything from your brain dump. That would be noise. You focus on the threats that sit in the meaningful quadrants of your matrix, the ones that your intuition screamed about, the ones your analysis told you not to ignore. If a risk doesn't deserve to be there, it doesn't get real estate on your plan. This is prime territory, and only the heavy hitters are allowed in. Once you have the list, you attach triggers to each risk. These are the early warning signs that tell you the risk is waking up, stretching its arms, and getting ready to ruin your life. A trigger is the first tremor before the earthquake, the whisper before the shout, the shift in the air before the storm. If you're working on a project, a trigger might be a missed mini deadline. If you're launching a business, a trigger might be a cost suddenly inching upward. If you're traveling, a trigger might be a weather alert or a delay notification. You define these triggers so you don't get caught off guard, so you never again get blindsided by something you could have seen coming with just a sliver of awareness. After the triggers, you write down your preventive actions. These are the moves you take now, before anything falls apart, the reinforcing beams you install before the building creaks. They're the proactive steps that shrink your risks, soften them, weaken them, make them less vicious. Preventive actions are where your earlier decisions, avoid, reduce, transfer, accept, become real. If you're reducing a risk, your preventive actions might include verifying information, adding backups, splitting tasks, double-checking suppliers, or clarifying expectations. If you're transferring a risk, your preventive action might be signing a contract or hiring an expert. If you're avoiding a risk, your preventive action might be changing the plan entirely before the damage can occur. These actions are the armor you build before stepping onto the battlefield. And then you list your response actions. The emergency playbook. The if this happens, here is exactly what I do. Roadmap. These aren't guesses. These aren't vague ideas. These are crisp, decisive steps you commit to in advance so you don't panic when the risk becomes reality. Response actions are the difference between watching disaster unfold helplessly and shutting it down with cold, controlled precision. If a supplier fails you, what's your backup? If a deadline slips, what gets shifted? If a payment is late, what's the fallback plan? If the weather ruins your travel, what's plan B? You write it all down clearly because chaos hates clarity. Chaos wants you to freeze. A lean risk plan doesn't let you freeze. It hands you your next move immediately. And the true beauty of this plan is its simplicity. There's no fluff, no filler, no academic jargon. It's a living document, not a trophy. It's something you use, not something you frame. It's lean because it has to be. Because in the real world, when the pressure spikes and everything starts shaking, nobody has time to flip through a novel. You need speed, precision, and confidence. A lean plan gives you all three. And once you create this plan, something extraordinary happens. You feel light. You feel prepared. You feel like the future isn't a chaotic beast waiting to maul you, but a landscape you can navigate with intelligence and intention. Everything becomes more manageable because you know what's out there, what to watch for, how to prevent it, and exactly how you'll respond if the universe decides to test you anyway. Once your lean risk plan is built, once the fog has lifted and you finally see where the threats live and how you'll handle them, you step into the phase that separates amateurs from unstoppable operators, monitoring and adapting. This is where risk management transforms from a one-time exercise into a living, breathing habit. Because the truth most people never want to accept, is that risks change, assumptions decay, conditions shift, people flake, markets wobble, technology fails, life refuses to sit still. And if you sit still while everything else moves, your precious plan will age faster than milk in the sun. Monitoring doesn't mean obsessing. It doesn't mean hovering over your risks like a paranoid hawk. It means checking in with a calm, practiced rhythm, simple, clean, intentional check-ins that keep you aligned with reality instead of locked in the fantasy version of how things are supposed to go. You set a cadence, whether it's daily, weekly, or tied to milestones, and in those moments you ask yourself one brutally honest question. What has changed since the last time I looked? That's it. That single question is the doorway through which every important update will walk through if you let it. A check-in might take 30 seconds. You glance at your top risks, you look at your triggers, and you notice whether anything is starting to drift. Maybe a supplier took a little longer to respond than usual. That's a yellow flag. Maybe a cost increased slightly. That's a tremor. Maybe a teammate seems overwhelmed. That's a hairline crack. These tiny signs are the warnings most people ignore until they snowball into catastrophe. But you aren't most people anymore. You're watching. You're aware. You're catching the earliest whispers of trouble before they have the chance to turn into screams. And the moment you notice something shifting, you adapt. Not dramatically, not chaotically, not with panic, but with precise, controlled adjustments. Maybe you revise a timeline. Maybe you reinforce a weak area. Maybe you update a preventive action. Maybe you adjust your response plan. Maybe you bump a risk into a different quadrant because circumstances changed. You treat your plan like a living organism that evolves as conditions evolve. You don't cling to outdated assumptions like a stubborn captain sailing straight into a storm because the old map said the waters were calm. You update the map. You respect the storm. You change course with intention. Because here's the truth most people refuse to face. Assumptions are fragile. They rot. They expire. They betray you the moment you stop paying attention to them. A plan built on outdated assumptions is a trap disguised as a strategy. But when you monitor your assumptions, when you actually check whether the conditions you believed in last week or last month are still real, you prevent that trap from ever springing on you. You treat assumptions like variables, not certainties, and that shift alone puts you miles ahead of anyone who treats their plans like stone tablets carved by divine prophecy. Monitoring and adapting turn you into someone who stays ahead instead of scrambling behind, someone who doesn't react to explosions because you already heard the fuse burning long before anyone else smelled the smoke, someone who doesn't collapse under pressure because you've already practiced the response in your mind, someone who doesn't cling to outdated plans but evolves with the world as it changes. And the best part? Once you build this habit, once monitoring becomes as routine as brushing your teeth, your stress plummets. You feel in control. You feel informed. You feel aware of the landscape around you. The future stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like something you can navigate with confidence. You're not just making plans. You're commanding them, steering them, shaping them as reality shifts under your feet. When you zoom all the way out and look at everything you've just built, this entire mental framework, this whole way of thinking, it becomes obvious that risk management isn't some cold mathematical ritual reserved for people who worship spreadsheets. It's clarity. It's awareness. It's the art of refusing to stumble blindly into preventable disasters. And the core truth, the truth that sits at the heart of all of this, is that you don't need complex equations to stay ahead of problems. You just need consistency, honesty, and the courage to look reality in the eye before it decides to slap you. Everything you've learned in this video leads back to one simple revelation. Clear thinking beats complicated math every single time. Being intentional beats being reactive. Seeing the dangers before they strike beats scrambling through the wreckage afterward. You've taken the chaos of uncertainty and transformed it into something you can navigate with calm precision. You learned how to spot risks that hide inside your assumptions. You learned how to evaluate them without drowning in numbers. You learned how to organize them into a matrix that reveals their true importance. You learned how to choose responses that neutralize the threat instead of letting it grow fangs and jump you from behind. You built a lean plan that operates like armor. And then you learned how to keep that armor updated, alive, and adaptive as life shifts beneath your feet. That's the real magic of risk management. Not the charts, not the formulas, not the technical jargon. It's the transformation that happens inside you. You go from hoping things will go well to making them go well. You go from fearing uncertainty to interpreting it like a seasoned navigator. You go from trusting your assumptions blindly to challenging them like a scientist. You go from reacting to problems at the last minute to intercepting them before they even rise out of the shadows. It's the difference between living in constant damage control and living with confidence that you can stay ahead of almost anything. So here's your moment, the part where everything shifts from interesting idea to actual power in your hands. Before this video ends, choose one real situation in your life, just one, and apply what you've learned. Pick a project, a plan, a goal, a trip, a decision you've been juggling, and run it through the process. Do a tiny risk brain dump. Identify the assumptions hiding underneath. Evaluate the top risks with your gut and your scale. Drop them into the matrix. Decide whether you'll avoid, reduce, transfer, or accept them. Write down your triggers, preventive moves, and response actions. Make the leanest, sharpest version of a risk plan you can. It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be real. And the moment you do that, just once, you'll feel the shift. You'll feel the clarity, the confidence, the sense that the world isn't a chaotic minefield anymore, but a landscape you can navigate with intelligence. You'll realize this mindset isn't just helpful, it's transformative. It's the difference between being dragged through your decisions and taking control of them. If you want to dive even deeper into tools like this, if you want to sharpen your decisions, strengthen your planning, and build the kind of thinking that makes you unstoppable, stick around. There are more practical, powerful decision-making frameworks waiting for you, and every single one of them is designed to make you sharper, faster, more resilient, and dramatically more prepared than the average person.